My daughter brought me my favorite Sunday dinner. As she left, my 6-year-old granddaughter whispered, "Grandma, don't eat it. Mommy told someone you'd be gone soon." My name is Lorraine Williams, and I am 66 years old. I live in a small, quiet town just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, in the same house where I raised my children and buried my husband. For 41 years, I taught 3rd grade at Jefferson Elementary, watching generations of little ones learn to read and write and dream. I retired 3 years ago, thinking I'd finally have time to tend my garden, spoil my grandbaby, and grow old in peace. Take a deep breath, because what I'm about to tell you is something no grandmother should ever have to say about her own child. My daughter tried to kill me, and it was my 6-year-old granddaughter who saved my life. I know those words sound impossible. I know because I've lived them, and some mornings I still wake up hoping it was all a nightmare. But it wasn't a dream. It was Sunday dinner. It was smothered pork chops. It was a whisper at the front door that changed everything I thought I knew about my own flesh and blood. If you're just joining me on this journey, I want you to know that sharing this story is one of the hardest things I've ever done. But if it helps even one person recognize danger hiding in plain sight, it's worth every word. Please hit that like button to help this story reach others who need to hear it. Subscribe to Black Lady Tales so you don't miss what happens next. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of this world is listening to this grandmother's heart tonight. Now let me take you back to the Sunday that shattered my world. In our family, Sunday dinner has always been sacred. My late husband, Robert, started the tradition when we first got married, back when I was just 24 years old with a 5-year-old daughter from my first marriage, and not a clue how to make a pot roast. Robert was patient with me. He grew up in a house where his mama cooked for 12 every Sunday after church, and he carried that love of gathering right into our home. For decades, our kitchen was the heart of everything. The smell of collard greens simmering on the stove, the sound of gospel music playing softly from the radio on the counter. Always WQMG, always the old hymns Robert loved. The worn wooden table where 3 generations had gathered to break bread, share stories, and remind each other that family was the only thing that really mattered. Robert passed 2 years ago. Heart failure, the doctors said. One evening, he was sitting in his recliner watching the Panthers game, and the next morning he simply didn't wake up. 68 years old, 40 years of marriage, gone between one heartbeat and the next. After he died, the house felt too big and too quiet. But I kept the Sunday dinner tradition alive, even if it was just me setting a single plate at that long table. Some Sundays, my son Marcus would drive down from Raleigh. Some Sundays, my daughter Denise would bring her family over. And on those Sundays, the house felt full again, even if the chair at the head of the table stayed empty. On the Sunday I'm about to tell you about, Denise called ahead and said she wanted to bring me dinner. Said she'd make my favorite, smothered pork chops with collard greens and sweet cornbread, using the recipe Robert had taught her years ago. I thought it was sweet. My baby girl taking care of her mama. Denise is 42 now. My firstborn. She married a man named Kevin about 15 years back, and they have one daughter together, my grandbaby Amara, who had just turned 6 that spring. Denise has always been the complicated one. Not difficult exactly, but complicated. The kind of child who needed more attention, more reassurance, more proof that she was loved. I always thought that came from the early years. Before Robert, when it was just the 2 of us struggling to make ends meet. Those years leave marks on a child, even when you do your best. Around 4 o'clock that Sunday, Denise's silver SUV pulled into my driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as she gathered containers from the back seat, balancing them in her arms. Amara hopped out of the passenger side, her little pink backpack bouncing as she ran toward the house. When they came inside, something felt different. I noticed it right away, but pushed the thought down like I'd been pushing down a lot of thoughts lately. Denise hugged me a little too long. She talked a little too much about the weather, about Amara's ballet class, about traffic on the highway. Her eyes kept darting around the kitchen, landing everywhere except on my face. The food smelled wonderful. She had packed it in Robert's old Tupperware containers, the ones with the faded blue lids that I hadn't been able to throw away, smothered pork chops glistening with gravy, collard greens with just the right amount of vinegar, cornbread still warm from her oven. "Mama, you just sit down and let me fix your plate," Denise said, already reaching for a dish. Amara stood beside me the whole time, which was unusual. Normally, that child bounced around the house like a little tornado, looking through my closets for dress-up clothes or begging me to let her help bake cookies. But that day, she pressed herself against my side and didn't let go. "You all right, sugar?" I asked her, smoothing down her braids. She nodded but didn't say anything. Her big brown eyes kept moving between me and her mother. Denise set the plate on the table in front of me. "There you go, Mama, just like Daddy used to make it. I hope I got it right." "I'm sure it's perfect, baby," I said. Denise checked her phone and announced they had to leave. Kevin was waiting for them at home. Something about a work call he had to make. The excuse felt flimsy, rushed. She was already heading toward the door before I could ask her to stay. "Come on, Amara, let's go." Amara didn't move. Amara now. Denise's voice was sharp. The child wrapped her arms around my waist and squeezed tight. I bent down to hug her back, and that's when she leaned up toward my ear. Her voice was barely a breath, so quiet I almost missed it. "Grandma, don't eat the food Mommy made you." My heart stopped. "What did you say, baby?" She pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. I saw fear there, real fear, the kind children shouldn't know. I heard her on the phone. "She told someone you'd be gone soon." "Amara." Denise's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "We're leaving, now." Before I could say anything, before I could ask what she meant, Amara was pulled away. She looked back at me once as Denise guided her toward the door, her little face pinched with worry. And then they were gone. I stood at that window watching my daughter's taillights disappear down the road. Then I turned and looked at the plate on my kitchen table. Steam still rose from those pork chops, the same recipe my Robert used to make, the same meal I'd eaten 1,000 times. But now that plate looked like a threat, and I had to decide what to do next. For a long time, I just stood there. The kitchen clock ticked on the wall above the stove, the same clock that had hung there since 1987. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The world kept moving like nothing had happened. Like my granddaughter hadn't just whispered words that made my blood run cold. I looked at the plate of food. The pork chops were thick and covered in rich brown gravy, exactly the way Robert used to make them. The collard greens glistened with pot liquor. The cornbread sat golden and perfect, a pat of butter melting into its center. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, but I couldn't move toward that plate. I couldn't pick up the fork. "Grandma, don't eat the food Mommy made you." I tried to make sense of it. Maybe Amara had misheard something. Children get things mixed up all the time. I'd spent 41 years in a classroom watching little minds twist simple phrases into something unrecognizable. Maybe Denise had been talking about a sick relative. Maybe gone soon meant moving away or traveling, or any of 100 things that didn't mean what my gut was screaming at me. But I kept seeing Amara's eyes, the fear in them, the way she had clung to me, pressed herself against my side like she was trying to protect me. Children don't lie about things like that. Children repeat what they hear. I lowered myself into the chair at the table, not to eat, but because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. I pressed my palms flat against the worn wood and tried to breathe. This is my daughter, my baby. There must be a mistake. I thought about Denise as a child, that round little face, those curious eyes always watching, always wanting to understand the world. I remembered the night she was born, 19 hours of labor in a hospital room with no air conditioning, just me and my mother and a nurse who kept telling me to push. I was 24 years old, alone. the baby's father long gone before I even started showing. Denise was all I had. I worked double shifts at the diner to pay for her formula, her clothes, her daycare. I read to her every night, even when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. When she fell and scraped her knees, I was there. When she had nightmares, she climbed into my bed. When the kids at school made fun of her secondhand clothes, I held her while she cried and promised her that things would get better. And things did get better. When Denise was 5, I met Robert Williams at a church potluck. He was a soft-spoken man with kind eyes and hands roughened from honest work. He managed the warehouse at a furniture factory, put in 12-hour days without complaint, and every Sunday he cooked for whoever needed feeding. He fell in love with me, and he fell in love with Denise, too. Robert never once treated her like she wasn't his. He adopted her officially when she was 7, gave her his last name, walked her down the aisle at her wedding. Denise called him Daddy, and she meant it. When he died, she wept like she'd lost her whole world, or so I thought. I sat at that table with the food growing cold, and I thought about my daughter as a teenager, moody and dramatic, always convinced the world was against her. I thought about her wedding day, the way she'd glowed when Kevin slipped the ring on her finger. I thought about the phone call when she told me she was pregnant with Amara, the joy in her voice, the future we'd all imagined together. Where had it gone wrong? And then, like fog lifting off a lake, the troubling memories started to surface. The ones I'd been pushing down for months, the ones I hadn't wanted to see. After Robert died, Denise started visiting more often. At first I thought it was grief, thought she needed to be close to the place where her father had lived. But her visits had a strange energy to them. She'd wander through the house, picking things up and putting them down. She'd comment on how big the place was, how much work it must be for me to maintain on my own. "Mama, did Daddy leave a will?" she asked about 3 weeks after the funeral. I told her yes, that the lawyer was handling everything. How much was the life insurance? The question landed like a stone in still water. I told her not to worry about it, that I was taken care of, but she kept asking. Not every visit, but enough that I noticed. Questions about the house, about my retirement savings, about what would happen to all of this when I was gone. I remembered the way she'd looked around the living room one afternoon, calculating something behind her eyes. This house must be worth, what, $150,000? Maybe more? With the way the market is? I remembered Kevin losing his job 8 months ago, something Denise had mentioned only in passing, like it wasn't important. I remembered the hints about credit card bills, the whispered arguments I'd overheard when I wasn't supposed to be listening. I remembered the expensive SUV in the driveway, the private ballet lessons for Amara, the vacations they posted on Facebook even as they asked me for money. Over the past 2 years, I had given Denise $15,000, a few thousand here for an emergency, a few thousand there to help with bills. Each time she asked, she seemed less grateful and more expectant, like the money was owed to her. The last time I gave her $3,000 just 2 months ago, she hadn't even said thank you. She just nodded and said, "Mama, you know we appreciate everything you do for us." And then there was the question that had haunted me ever since she asked it, the one I'd tried to forget. We were sitting on the back porch, watching Amara chase fireflies in the yard. The sun had just gone down and the air smelled like honeysuckle. Out of nowhere, Denise turned to me and said, "Mama, what happens to all this when you're gone? The house, the money, everything Daddy left you?" I felt a chill run through me even though the evening was warm. I told her I didn't want to talk about that I planned to be around for a good long while yet. She'd laughed, but it hadn't reached her eyes. "I know, Mama, I'm just asking. Just in case." Just in case. I stared at that plate of food until the steam stopped rising and the gravy started to congeal at the edges. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. I should throw it away, I thought. Dump it in the trash and forget this whole thing, but something wouldn't let me. Slowly, I stood and walked to the cabinet where I kept the plastic wrap. My fingers trembled as I tore off a sheet and carefully covered the plate. I wrote the date on a piece of masking tape and pressed it to the plastic. Then I opened the refrigerator and placed the plate on the top shelf, behind the orange juice and the leftover rice from 3 days ago. It felt like a betrayal just to do that much. It felt like I was calling my own daughter a murderer. But Amara's words echoed in my ears, and I couldn't make them stop. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the bed Robert and I had shared for 40 years, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. The house creaked and settled around me. Every sound made my heart jump. I got up twice to check that the doors were locked. I stood at the kitchen window at 2 a.m, looking out at the empty street, wondering if I was losing my mind. On the nightstand beside me, there was a photo of Denise at her college graduation. She was wearing her cap and gown, grinning at the camera, her whole future ahead of her. Robert stood on one side, me on the other. We all looked so happy. I picked up the photo and held it to my chest and prayed. I asked God to give me wisdom, to show me the truth, to let this all be a terrible misunderstanding. I asked him to protect my family from whatever darkness had crept in. Dawn came slow and gray, and I had no answers, only more questions. By morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't eat that food, but I also couldn't live with not knowing. There was only one way to find out the truth, a way that might destroy my family forever, or prove that I was just a paranoid old woman who'd lost her mind. I picked up my phone and searched for something I never imagined I'd need, a laboratory that tests for poison. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in my hand, staring at the search results like they were written in a foreign language. Private toxicology testing, food contamination analysis, poison detection services. The words looked strange and ugly, words that belonged in crime shows and newspaper headlines, not in the life of a retired school teacher from North Carolina. I scrolled through the options, each one making me feel more foolish, more paranoid, more like a woman who had lost touch with reality. But then I'd remember Amara's face, the whisper, the fear, and I'd keep searching. I found a private laboratory about 45 minutes from my house in a town called Monroe. They specialized in environmental and food testing, and their website said they could analyze samples for a wide range of contaminants, including toxic substances. The consultation was free. The testing would cost $400. $400 to find out if my daughter was trying to kill me. I closed my eyes and took a breath. Then I called the number. The woman who answered was professional and kind, asking no questions about why a 66-year-old woman might want to test her Sunday dinner for poison. She explained the process, told me to keep the sample refrigerated and bring it in as soon as possible. She scheduled me for the next morning, a Monday. I spent the rest of that Sunday in a fog. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus on the television or the book I'd been reading. I just sat and waited and tried not to look at the refrigerator. That night, I dreamed about Robert. He was standing in the kitchen stirring a pot of collard greens on the stove, and he turned to me with worry in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I woke up at 4 a.m. with tears on my pillow and his name on my lips. Monday morning. I put the plate of food in a cooler bag with 2 ice packs and set it on the passenger seat of my car. The drive to Monroe felt longer than 45 minutes. I kept glancing at the bag like it might explode. The laboratory was in a plain brick building at the edge of a small industrial park. Inside, it looked like a doctor's office. White walls, fluorescent lights, a waiting room with magazines nobody wanted to read. I filled out the paperwork with trembling hands, writing my name and address and contact information, checking boxes I didn't fully understand. When I got to the line that asked for the reason for testing, I paused. What was I supposed to write? I think my daughter poisoned this food, but I pray to God I'm wrong. I wrote, personal safety concern. The technician who took my sample was a young black woman with kind eyes and braids pulled back from her face. She didn't ask questions, didn't judge, just handled the container professionally and gave me a receipt. Results will be ready in about 72 hours. She said, we'll call you as soon as we have them. 72 hours, 3 days. I thanked her and walked back to my car, feeling like a criminal leaving the scene of a crime. The whole drive home, I kept asking myself what I was doing. Was I really paying $400 to accuse my own daughter of attempted murder? But every time the doubt crept in, I heard Amara's voice again. I saw her eyes. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. Denise called me on Tuesday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was cheerful, asking how I liked the pork chops, saying she hoped I'd enjoyed them. I listened to it 3 times, searching for something in her tone, some hint of guilt or malice. I heard nothing but my daughter's voice, the same voice that had called me Mama for 42 years. I texted her back, "Just a little under the weather, baby. Nothing serious, don't worry about me." She responded with a heart emoji and a message saying she'd check on me later in the week. On Wednesday morning, I had a video call scheduled with Amara. It was something we'd started doing after Robert died, a way for my grandbaby to stay connected with her grandmother, even when visits weren't possible. Usually these calls were full of laughter. Amara would show me her drawings or make silly faces or tell me stories about her friends at school. This call was different. Amara appeared on the screen looking smaller than usual, her shoulders hunched, her smile forced. Denise was somewhere nearby. I could see her shadow moving in the background, hear her voice occasionally prompting Amara to speak up or sit still. "How are you, baby?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm okay, Grandma." But her eyes kept darting to the side, toward where her mother must have been standing. I wanted to ask her about the whisper. I wanted to tell her that I'd listened, that I hadn't eaten the food, but I couldn't do that with Denise in the room, so I just smiled and asked about ballet and told her I loved her. When the call ended, I sat staring at the blank screen for a long time. That child was carrying a secret too heavy for her 6 years, and there was nothing I could do until I had proof. Wednesday crawled by. I barely ate. I barely slept. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart stopped. I cleaned the house 3 times, not because it needed cleaning, but because I couldn't sit still. I prayed more than I'd prayed since Robert died. On Thursday afternoon, the phone rang. The number was from Monroe, from the laboratory. I answered with a voice I didn't recognize as my own. "Hello? Mrs. Williams? This is Dr. Patterson from Southeastern Analytical Labs. I'm calling about your test results." My hand gripped the phone so tight my knuckles ached. "Yes, I'm here." There was a pause, a professional pause, the kind doctors and lawyers and police officers use when they're about to deliver news that will change your life. "Mrs. Williams, we found elevated levels of ethylene glycol in your food sample." The words didn't register at first. "Ethylene. What?" "Ethylene glycol," he repeated. "It's a compound most commonly found in antifreeze. It has a sweet taste, which makes it difficult to detect in food, especially food with rich or sweet flavors." I couldn't breathe. "The levels we found weren't immediately lethal," he continued, his voice clinical and calm. "But if consumed regularly over a period of time, say once a week for several weeks, the accumulation would cause significant kidney damage, eventually kidney failure." Kidney failure, slow poisoning, death that looks natural. "Mrs. Williams, are you still there?" "Are you sure?" I heard myself ask. Could there be a mistake? Could it be contamination from something else? "Ma'am, I ran this test 3 times personally. There is no mistake. Someone deliberately added a toxic substance to that food." The phone slipped from my fingers. I don't remember falling, but suddenly I was on my kitchen floor, the cold linoleum pressing against my cheek. I heard sounds coming from somewhere far away, animal sounds, wounded sounds, and slowly I realized they were coming from me. I was sobbing. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook my entire body, that stole the breath from my lungs and the strength from my bones. The kind of crying I hadn't done since Robert died, because my daughter, my baby girl, the child I had carried and birthed and raised and loved with every fiber of my being, had tried to kill me, not in a moment of rage, not in a fit of passion, but slowly, deliberately. Calculating the weeks it would take for my kidneys to fail, for my body to shut down, for everyone to think that poor Lorraine had just gotten old and sick like people do. She had used Robert's recipe, the pork chops he used to make with so much love. She had taken our Sunday dinner tradition, the sacred thing that held our family together, and turned it into a weapon. The cruelty of it was almost worse than the poison itself. I don't know how long I lay there on that floor. Minutes, hours. The afternoon light shifted across the kitchen, shadows moving along the walls, and still I couldn't move. Eventually, I heard the phone making noise. It was still on the line, the lab technician calling my name. I reached for it with a hand that didn't feel like mine. "Mrs. Williams? Mrs. Williams, are you all right? Do you need me to call emergency services?" "No," I managed. My voice was raw, scraped hollow. "No, I need documentation. I need proof in writing, an official report." "Of course. I can email that to you within the hour and will mail a certified hard copy as well. Mrs. Williams, I have to advise you. Given the nature of these findings, you should contact law enforcement." "I understand." I ended the call and sat up slowly, leaning against the kitchen cabinet. The house was quiet around me, quiet and familiar and full of memories. The table where my family had gathered, the counter where Robert used to roll out biscuit dough, the window where I'd watched my children play in the backyard. How had it come to this? I wiped my face with the back of my hand and made myself breathe. The shock was fading, replaced by something harder, something that felt like steel forming in my chest. The lab would send me proof, documentation, evidence, but evidence of poison wasn't enough. I needed to understand why. I needed to know what had turned my daughter into someone capable of this monstrous thing. And more than that, more than anything, I needed to make sure Amara was safe. That little girl had risked everything to warn me. She had whispered the truth when no one else could see it. And she was still in that house, still under her mother's roof, still vulnerable in ways that made my blood run cold. What would Denise do if she discovered Amara had betrayed her secret? I couldn't go to the police alone. I needed someone I could trust, someone who would believe me, someone with the resources and the steady head to help me navigate what came next. I thought about my friends, my neighbors, my church family. But this was too big, too shameful, too impossible to explain to anyone outside the family. And then I thought about Marcus, my son, 38 years old, the quiet one, the steady one, the child who had never given me a moment of trouble. He lived in Raleigh, worked at a bank, called me every Sunday afternoon without fail. He and Denise had never been especially close. There was a 4-year age gap and a difference in temperament that kept them at a polite distance. But Marcus loved me. Marcus would drop everything if I needed him. I picked up my phone from the floor and found his number. My finger hovered over the call button for a long moment. Once I made this call, there was no going back. Once I told Marcus, the secret would be out. The family would be broken. Or maybe it was already broken, had been breaking for longer than I knew. I pressed the button. It rang twice before he answered. "Hey, Mama, everything okay?" I sat there on my kitchen floor with tears still wet on my face and made myself think clearly. The lab had the evidence, but evidence of poison wasn't enough. I needed to know why. I needed to understand what had turned my daughter into a monster, and I needed to make sure that precious little girl who had saved my life was safe from her own mother. I picked up my phone and called my son Marcus. When he answered, I said 4 words I never thought I'd say: "I need your help." Marcus arrived at my door 2 hours after that phone call, his face tight with worry and his overnight bag still in the car. He worked as a loan officer at a bank in Raleigh, a steady man with a steady job, and I could count on one hand the number of times I'd seen him lose his composure. But when I sat him down at my kitchen table and told him everything, the whisper, the lab results, the poison in my pork chops, I watched my son's face move through stages of emotion I'd never witnessed before. First came disbelief. his brow furrowed, his head shaking slowly, his mouth forming the word no without any sound coming out. Then came fury. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists on the table. A vein pulsed at his temple, and finally, protective determination. He looked at me with Robert's eyes, my late husband's steady, unwavering gaze, and said, "Mama, we're going to the police right now." I reached across the table and took his hands in mine. They were shaking, or maybe mine were. Maybe both. "Not yet," I said. "I need to understand why. What could make her do this? And more than that, I need to know that baby is safe. Amara is still in that house." Marcus's expression shifted. He hadn't thought about Amara, about what it meant that a 6-year-old had been brave enough to whisper a warning to her grandmother while her mother stood just feet away. "You're right," he said quietly. "We need to be smart about this." We spent the rest of that evening making a plan. Marcus would use his connections in the banking industry to find out what he could about Denise and Kevin's financial situation. I would keep acting normal, answering Denise's texts, pretending I'd eaten the food and everything was fine. And together we would build a case so airtight that when we went to the police, there would be no room for doubt. The next morning, Marcus started making calls. He was careful, discreet, using professional channels and old colleagues who owed him favors. By mid-afternoon, he had a picture of my daughter's finances that made my blood run cold. Denise and Kevin were drowning. Their credit card debt totaled $87,000, spread across 6 different cards. Their mortgage was underwater by $95,000. They owed far more than the house was worth. 2 months ago, they'd received an official foreclosure notice. The bank was coming for their home, and they had no way to stop it. Kevin had lost his job 8 months earlier. This was news to me. Denise had never said a word. She'd mentioned he was between projects once, made a vague comment about the economy being tough, but she'd never told me her husband had been unemployed for the better part of a year. I thought about the $15,000 I'd given them over the past 2 years. Money for emergencies, money to help with bills, money I'd handed over without question because that's what mothers do. But $15,000 against a debt of nearly $200,000. It was like throwing a cup of water on a house fire, and yet they'd kept up appearances. The silver SUV in the driveway, Amara's private ballet lessons at $40 a class, the vacation photos on Facebook, a beach trip just last summer, Denise smiling in a sundress like she didn't have a care in the world. All of it a facade, all of it a lie. "There's more," Marcus said, his voice grim. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through something that made his face go pale. 6 weeks ago, Denise had called my life insurance company. The policy Robert had left me, the one I'd never touched because I didn't need the money, was worth $350,000. Denise was listed as the primary beneficiary, something Robert and I had arranged years ago when we assumed our daughter would outlive us both and would need the money to settle our affairs. Denise had called the company claiming she was helping me organize my paperwork. She'd asked about the policy value, the beneficiary status, the timeline for payout after a death. The customer service representative had given her all the information because Denise knew my social security number, my date of birth, all the details that made her sound legitimate. Marcus set his phone down and looked at me. "Mama, she was calculating your worth." $350,000 from the life insurance, $180,000 from the house, my house paid off and free, the home Robert and I had built together, plus my savings, my pension, my modest investments. All told, I was worth nearly $500,000. Dead, I was worth $500,000. And my daughter had done the math. Marcus kept digging. He found a credit card statement from Denise's personal account, not the joint account with Kevin, but a card in her name alone. 3 weeks before that poisoned Sunday dinner, she'd made a purchase at a hardware store in Charlotte. The line item was generic, household supplies. But the amount matched what a gallon of antifreeze would cost. We also looked at Kevin's work schedule from his previous job, before he was let go. On the Sunday Denise brought me that plate of food, Kevin had been at a job interview across town. He wasn't home when she prepared the meal. He wasn't there when she added whatever she added to those pork chops. He might not know, Marcus said slowly. This might be just her. I sat with that for a moment. Did it matter? Kevin's ignorance didn't make the poison less deadly. It didn't make Denise less guilty. But it complicated things. It meant that when the police came, Kevin might be as blindsided as the rest of us. It meant Amara's father might be innocent, even if her mother was a monster. We can sort that out later, I said. Right now, I need to get Amara out of that house. Because that was the fear that had been growing in my chest since the moment Marcus arrived. Amara had warned me. That precious, brave little girl had risked her mother's wrath to whisper 4 sentences in my ear. If Denise found out, if she discovered that her own daughter had betrayed her secret, what would she do? I'd already seen what Denise was capable of. I'd seen the lab results. I'd seen the calculation, the planning, the cold-blooded willingness to watch her own mother die slowly from kidney failure. A woman who could do that to her mother might do anything to a child who got in her way. Marcus and I made a plan. I would call Denise and invite Amara for a weekend sleepover, something I'd done dozens of times before, nothing unusual. Once Amara was safe in my house, we would go to the police with everything we had, the lab results, the financial records, the life insurance inquiry, the credit card statement. Marcus would handle the legal side. I would handle the heart side. That was how we'd always divided things. Even when he was a boy, he got his practicality from Robert, his quiet competence, while Denise got... I didn't know anymore what Denise had gotten from me. I picked up my phone. My hands were steadier than I expected. Maybe it was the clarity of purpose, the knowledge that I was protecting something more important than myself. We had the evidence. We had the motive. We had the paper trail that showed my daughter had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The next step was the police, but I couldn't do it, not yet. Not while that precious child was still in that house with a mother who had already proven she'd destroy family for money. I picked up the phone and called Denise. "Baby," I said, keeping my voice steady, "why don't you let Amara spend the weekend with Grandma? I've been missing her something terrible." There was a pause on the other end, and in that pause, I felt the entire fragile plan teeter on the edge. The pause lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then Denise's voice came through the phone, lighter than I expected. "That's actually perfect timing, Mama. Kevin and I have some things we need to take care of this weekend. I'll drop her off Friday after school." I almost laughed at the irony. She sounded relieved. Probably thought she was getting a free babysitter while she figured out how to pay the mortgage or dodge another creditor. She had no idea that by the time the weekend was over, her whole world would come crashing down. Friday evening, Denise's SUV pulled into my driveway just as the sun was setting. Amara jumped out before the car had fully stopped, her overnight bag bouncing against her hip, her braids flying behind her as she ran toward the front door. I caught her in my arms and held her close. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and little girl sweat, and when she wrapped her arms around my neck, she didn't let go. Denise waved from the car window. "Be good for Grandma, baby. I'll pick you up Sunday afternoon." I waved back, my smile fixed in place, watching until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Inside the house, with the door closed and locked behind us, Amara looked up at me with those big brown eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper, just like it had been that terrible Sunday. "Did I do the right thing, Grandma?" I knelt down so we were eye to eye. I took her small hands in mine. "You saved my life, baby. You are the bravest girl in the whole world." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and I pulled her into my arms again. She cried quietly, her little body shaking, releasing fear she'd been carrying for weeks. I held her and rocked her and whispered that everything was going to be okay, even though I didn't know if that was true. That night, Marcus took Amara to the park while I prepared for what came next. I organized the evidence in a folder, The lab report, the financial documents Marcus had gathered, the timeline we'd pieced together. I wrote out a statement in my own words, everything from Amara's whisper to the phone call from the laboratory. Saturday morning, Marcus and I drove to the police station while a trusted neighbor watched Amara. The woman behind the front desk directed us to Detective Harrison, a black woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She had the look of someone who had seen everything and still chose to show up every day. We sat in her small office, and I told her my story from the beginning. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she took the folder of evidence and reviewed each document carefully. "Mrs. Williams," she said finally, "this is attempted murder. We need to move today." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I knew they were coming. Attempted murder. My daughter, my baby girl. Detective Harrison explained the process. They would execute an arrest warrant that afternoon. They would search Denise's home for additional evidence. They would test any remaining food products for contamination. She assured me they would handle this with professionalism and discretion, but she also warned me there was no way to keep something like this quiet. I signed the formal statement. It was the hardest signature of my life. Harder than the mortgage papers when Robert and I bought this house, harder than the death certificate when he passed. I was signing my name to an accusation against my own child. That afternoon, I insisted on being there when they arrested her. Detective Harrison tried to talk me out of it, said it would be traumatic, said I should stay home with my granddaughter, but I needed to see it. I needed to know it was real. They let me wait in an unmarked police car parked across the street from Denise's house. From there, I watched as 2 officers walked up the front path and knocked on the door. Kevin answered. He was wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, looking confused and tired. The officer spoke to him briefly, and then Denise appeared behind him in the doorway. The moment she saw the uniforms, her face changed. Something flickered across her features. Recognition, then fear, then a hard mask of denial. She knew. In that instant, she knew exactly why they were there. They handcuffed her in her own doorway, reading her rights while Kevin stood frozen beside her, asking questions no one answered. The neighbors had started to gather on their porches, watching the scene unfold. As the officers led Denise toward the patrol car, her eyes swept the street and landed on me. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stared at each other, mother and daughter, separated by 20 feet, and a chasm that could never be crossed. Then Denise's face twisted into something I didn't recognize. Rage. Pure, ugly rage. "You were supposed to die," she screamed. "You're old. It was my money. You were supposed to be gone." The officers pushed her head down as they put her in the back of the car, but she kept screaming, her voice muffled by the glass. "It should have been mine, all of it." I sat in that unmarked car and felt something inside me shatter. Later, Detective Harrison told me about Kevin. They'd questioned him separately, and the man had broken down completely. He showed them text messages where Denise had told him she was handling their financial problems, that she had a plan to save them from foreclosure. He'd assumed she meant a second job or a loan from a relative. He never imagined she meant murder. Kevin wasn't charged. He was a victim too, in his own way. Deceived by the woman he'd married, blind to the monster she'd become. The detective also told me about the interrogation. Denise had eventually confessed, though she never expressed remorse. She told them she deserved the inheritance for all the years she'd sacrificed. She said I was selfish for hoarding money I didn't need. She claimed the slow poisoning would have looked like natural kidney failure, an old woman's body simply giving out. And when they told her that Amara had warned me that my granddaughter's whisper had saved my life, Denise's rage erupted again. "That little traitor," she spat. A mother calling her 6-year-old a traitor for saving her grandmother's life. I watched them put my daughter in that police car, the child I had nursed, raised, loved, and sacrificed for, and all I could hear were her words, screamed across the yard for the whole neighborhood to witness. You were supposed to die. That night, I held Amara while she slept, and I cried tears I didn't know I still had. Not for myself. I had survived. But for the family that was now shattered beyond repair, and for the long road of healing that stretched out before me. 6 months have passed since that afternoon when the police took my daughter away in handcuffs. The trial was swift. Denise's lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity, financial stress, temporary insanity, all the excuses people reach for when the truth is too ugly to face. But the evidence was overwhelming. The lab results, the credit card records, the life insurance inquiry, her own confession, captured on recording. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty of attempted first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 12. I sat in that courtroom and watched them lead my daughter away, and I didn't say a word. What could I say? She had chosen money over her mother's life. She had calculated my worth in dollars and decided I was more valuable dead. Kevin filed for divorce the week after the arrest. The proceedings were quick. Denise didn't contest anything from behind bars. He was granted full custody of Amara, which was the right decision legally. But Kevin works long hours now, rebuilding his career from nothing, trying to climb out of the financial hole Denise had dug for both of them. So Amara lives with me 4 nights a week. It's not the retirement I planned. At 66, I thought I'd be tending my garden and reading mystery novels, not raising a child who wakes up crying in the middle of the night. But that little girl saved my life. The least I can do is give her a safe place to heal. Amara sees a therapist every Thursday, a kind woman named Dr. Patterson who specializes in childhood trauma. The progress is slow. Some days, Amara seems almost like a normal 6-year-old, laughing at cartoons and begging for ice cream. Other days, she goes quiet, retreating into herself, and I know she's thinking about her mother. She asked me once if it was her fault that Mommy went to jail. I held her face in my hands and told her the truth. Baby, you did nothing wrong. You were brave. You told the truth when it mattered most. Your mama made her own choices, and those choices had consequences. But none of that is on you, not one bit of it. I don't know if she believed me. I don't know if she'll ever fully believe me, but I'll keep saying it until she does. I made changes after everything happened. I rewrote my will. Marcus is now the primary beneficiary, with a trust established for Amara's education and future. I changed the life insurance policy too, and I started volunteering at a women's shelter in Charlotte, helping other people recognize the warning signs I missed for so long. Because here's what I learned. Greed doesn't enter hearts suddenly. It grows slowly like mold in dark places, feeding on resentment and entitlement until it consumes everything good. I don't know when Denise started to see me as a burden instead of a mother, an obstacle instead of family. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe there were signs I should have noticed years ago. And I learned something else. Children see what we refuse to see. Amara heard her mother on that phone call because children pay attention. They haven't learned yet to make excuses for the people they love. They haven't learned to explain away cruelty or rationalize evil. They just see what's in front of them, clear and true. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It tells me that sharing my pain has meant something. Subscribe to Black Lady Tales so you can join me for more stories that need to be told. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I want to know that this grandmother's voice is reaching hearts around the world. And if you've ever had to make an impossible choice to protect yourself from someone you loved, share your story. We heal by speaking our truth. Yesterday afternoon, Amara and I were in the backyard planting flowers, marigolds, her choice. She likes how bright they are, how they seem to glow even on cloudy days. She pushed her small hands into the soil, and then she looked up at me with Robert's eyes, my late husband's eyes, passed down through the generations. "Grandma," she asked, "do flowers grow even when the ground is broken?" I smiled and brushed dirt from her cheek. "Especially then, baby, especially then." We patted the soil together, the afternoon sun warm on our backs, and I thought about all the things that grow from painful ground, new roots, new blooms, new beginnings. That little girl who whispered a warning in my ear saved my life. And now I get to spend whatever years I have left returning the favor, showing her that family isn't about blood or money, but about who holds you when the world breaks apart. If you're watching this and something feels wrong in your own life, trust that feeling. Trust the whispers, and trust that you deserve to be safe, no matter who the danger comes from. This is Lorraine Williams saying thank you for listening to an old grandmother's story. Until next time, stay blessed, stay wise, and stay loved.